before we get into a new year.
So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. Would you want the land use recommendations back by the end of the year then?
Yes.
Who can open up, where they can open up, what they got to do to open up?
Yes.
Okay. And then and some clarification of who's operating within the law and who's not, and recommendations on how that should be resolved?
Yes, the council is going to meet in a meeting in December, I see, which is normally not necessarily the case, but that might give us an opportunity to do that, and that would give us, that second week in September, that would give this task force a full 90 days to come up with some of those recommendations. Does that sound?
That's fine
right?
with me. Do we have any legal issues we've got to consider going forward? Brown Act, the process of appointing task force members, any of that stuff that we got to worry about?
Well, as I understand it, we'd be amending the current resolution by interlineation, perhaps adding just a clause at the end of the last paragraph to say something to the effect of, with the task force reporting back to the full city council before the end of the calendar year 2009 on the land use issues, which would fall under subcategory 2, guidelines for structure of medical marijuana cooperatives and collectives. And the other amendment would be to kind of throw in some language on page 3, about 2/3 of the page down, where it talks about the composition of the task force, to maybe add a further category and to include members of the community. There are 9 listed categories. I could also perhaps, if given a minute here, come up with some wording to say shall be composed of 11 citizens, and maybe not make it mandatory that they have the following backgrounds, but with consideration for the following backgrounds. That would give each of you a little more wiggle room with which to operate.
And we've done that before with, for example, the Mission Bay task force and that kind of thing, so we're okay there. And I would like to leave the task force, the duration of the task force, to a year, so that we get the recommendations as quickly as possible to council for policy issues, but keep the task force around long enough so they can do some review of how well have we done at creating policy, and are we in a better position today than we were a year ago. But that's the outside that it would be in existence for a year. Does that make sense?
Yes, currently that would be within what's before you.
Okay.
So just so I'm clear, are you supporting an earlier time frame of 90 days or by the end of the year for recommendations?
Yeah, recommendations on the land use issues by the end of this calendar year. So that would be by mid-December, since we break for, we got a 2-week break, I guess, at the end of December, right?
Yes.
And then also that in nominating members of the committee of the task force, that we also include community members who, have a say on this, and I think that's real important too. And then, but keep the duration at a maximum of 1 year. And again, under the city charter, it says these have to be around for a short period of time. And so it would be the volunteers, it would be a member of my staff, District 7 staff, the independent budget analyst and the city attorney would be represented, and then we would have the authority to contact the mayor's office, the police department, and get more resources in to answer questions for us. Right?
Yes, and I'll defer to Ms. Lanzafame on this. So my understanding of the charter, though, is that the council would direct the mayor to appear before either the full council or a committee of the council. I don't know that you would direct them to directly appear before a citizens task force.
Ms. Lanzafame, would you comment on that, please?
That is correct. It's the council or a committee. And if you give me a moment, I'll pull up the charter section. We were looking at the motion.
Mr. Faulkner? Yeah, we're going to get to conclusion.
Actually, it's Charter Section 270H. And it states that any city official or department head in the administrative service may be summoned to appear before the council or any committee of the council to provide information or answer any question.
Let's conclude. Mr. DeMaio.
I know Ms. Emerald had noted that she's not trying to expand, that the intent of this committee is not to expand the Prop 218 and Attorney General guidelines. Given that, as it relates to 215, sorry. I love Prop 218, one of the most important things that we've ever done as a state. As it relates to the 3 objectives of the task force, and objectives are important, the word caregiver does not include the adjective primary caregiver, which is of great concern to me because the language is primary caregiver versus just normal caregiver, and I would just suggest...
Are you suggesting a modification, Mr. DeMaio?
A modification.
I'm happy to add that.
Okay.
Okay. And that's accepted. So I thank Ms. Emerald for making those modifications, particularly on the timing. I believe it's important for this council to act soon, which we will now do within the next several months. And I, just as an aside, I also believe, as I've said before, I believe it's very important that the San Diego Police Department enforce all existing rules and regulations. If we do not have any additional council comment, we do have a motion and a second on the floor with those changes. I'd ask the council to please vote. Clerk, call the roll. That passes 6-1, with Councilmember DeMaio voting no and Councilmember Hueso absent. Thank you all for being here this afternoon on this item. We'll take a 4-minute break, and we'll be back with our next item.